Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. We got our three panelists here. Welcome to everybody that's rolling in now. I'm going to give it no more than 30 seconds just to let the stragglers roll in, and we'll get right to it because we got a lot to talk about. I just want to note that it is really wonderful to see everybody. It's not often we get to do that these days. With everything going on, it's hard to get everybody in one place and have these meaningful discussions. So thank you all for being here today. Like I said, give it about 15 more seconds, and we'll get right to it because we got. In the meantime, everybody that's watching right now, if you want to brainstorm your questions, because we're going to have several opportunities to answer those. If there's anything you've ever wanted to ask a reporter, if there's anything about the news industry that you've ever wondered, now's your chance to get those questions answered. To the reporters who are watching, please feel free, like I said, this is a discussion. Please feel free to drop a comment anytime, share your feedback on the topics we end up discussing, and we'll just move forward. So I think we'll get started now. Welcome to what is hopefully the first in several discussions that we're calling, Why Didn't You Cover That? Why didn't you cover that, despite our best efforts, is probably one of the most asked questions that reporters get on a weekly basis. And we think it's time that we address it, especially in 2020 when we're facing a pandemic, a massive civil rights movement, and all of the daily stories that we usually cover on top of that. I want you to know from the start, like I mentioned, that this is a discussion. We'll not just be chatting amongst each other. We want you to take part, so please feel free to do that. We're going to start off very soon here with introductions. We're going to start off with an opening question, and very soon after that, we'll be opening up for comments and questions, so get ready for that. Shout out to SPJ Florida and the News Guild for hosting today's discussion. I'm Giuseppe Sabella. I'm the education reporter at the Bradenton Herald. I'm from Lee County, grew up in Cape Coral, went to Florida Gulf Coast University for 2 years and graduated from the University of Florida in Gainesville. More importantly, I have a cat named Lucy. You might see her at some point during this stream. My favorite animal is the opossum, and you probably can't see it, but I have a bicycle right behind me that's gathering dust. I bought that during quarantine, have not used it once, and that's really all you need to know about me as a person. So I think I'm going to get into introducing our three panelists here. Jessica, would you mind starting us off?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica De Leon. I am the law enforcement reporter at the Bradenton Herald. I'm also the chair of the Bradenton Herald News Guild. I was born in Texas and raised in South Florida, Dade, Broward County. Went to Florida National University and University of Florida, first generation Cuban American. And I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all tonight.
We'll just take it over to the other coast now. David, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm David Neal from Miami Herald, staff writer. I was in sports for 27 years. I am now the real-time breaking news reporter. Have done that for the last 4.5 years. I came to the Miami Herald in 1989 out of Indiana University. I'm a Hoosier born and raised, however, been South Floridian for now most of my life. I just pounded an entire colada as proof, and happy and honored to get this time with you and with the folks also on the panel.
Like I said, I am so happy to see you all here. Linda, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Linda Robertson. I am a Michigan native, but I grew up in Miami, Florida. And after college, I returned to Miami, Florida to work for my hometown newspaper, and I've been there ever since. And I cover local news. I sort of write stories about what makes Miami tick. Like David, I'm a former sports writer. For 30 years, I was a sports writer and sports columnist. But the transition to news has been very gratifying, and because it gives me more chance to write about the people of my hometown, and I enjoy that more than anything. And I look forward to hearing from you all.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's rare these days that we all get to sit down and have like what you could call a face-to-face conversation in 2020. We're going to get into the opening question I talked about, and then right after that, we're going to get into tips from our panelists on ways to, bring story tips to your local reporters and how to, form a connection with your local newsrooms. The first question, we're going to start in the same order with Jessica, and that is, what is a problem facing journalists today or a challenge that you've had to overcome in the last several years?
Well, certainly the shrinking of the newsrooms, I think, is probably the biggest, if not one of the biggest challenges we all face. Here at the Bradenton Herald, when I started in early 2013, we had about 27 employees in the newsroom alone, which is literally 3 times of what the newsroom is today. When the pandemic hit, we didn't have a health writer, and that we really felt that, and covering the pandemic has been something obviously that it touches upon everyone's beat, but more so now without a health reporter, without someone who specializes in that area, we've all had to divvy up that piece of the pie. And that takes away from us being able to cover our own beats and how COVID is specifically impacting those beats.
Before I get to you, David, I wanted to add, and this is probably not news to the panelists here or any reporters, but one of the more widely reported figures is from the Pew Research Center, which showed that the number of newspaper employees dropped by 51% between 2008 and 2019, 51%, from about 71,000 workers to 35,000. So this is not just a problem we're facing here in Florida. This is national. David, same question. Is there a problem facing journalists today or a challenge that they must overcome you'd like to highlight?
Well, it's a similar situation with here in South Florida. You have an ever expanding population because no matter how many hurricanes hit, no matter how much corruption there is, and no matter how bad our reputation, people still seem to want to come here, and they keep coming here. And we have more people, more municipalities. When I started at the Herald back in 1989, every area of Miami-Dade County and Broward County had a Herald reporter assigned to it. And now we actually have more municipalities and more local governments in Dade and Broward. However, we actually have fewer people in the Herald overall now than we did just in Broward back then. And also the competitive nature is very different than what it once was, but before you had, okay, we've got time, we've got to, let's work this story and, get it in by, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. Now that's the internet. The internet should be the greatest thing in the world for us because it puts us on a sort of competitive, equal balance. In fact, ahead of, in some ways, TV or radio. And so that's kind of a quick cranking thing, and you're having to hustle there. But also, I think more of us are expected to do more stories and satisfy this, kind of the beast, as we call it, and satisfy content. Because now we're like cable news. I always said about, CNN, Fox, any kind of cable news network, they can never tell you, hey, nothing's going on. It's all, nothing really big's going on. Check back with us in 20 minutes. We're going dark. They've always have to tell you something. They always have to cover something. Similarly, these days, you're never going to see on our websites, a half hour where there's not a new story going up, or 4.
Did you say an increase in municipalities and a decrease in reporters? Is that what you said?
Yeah, when I started at the Herald, Doral was not a city. Pinecrest was not a city. Palmetto Bay, Cutler Bay, Miami Gardens. It was these were areas that were part of Metro-Dade County. There are areas in Broward County that were, even if they were cities, they really weren't. There wasn't much there. Pembroke Pines, Weston was a kind of a development that, for almost a white flight development advertised by Dan Marino. now very different and very much a city. But you have more of these little governments, which are they can produce some of the best stories, but now we have fewer people to get to them, get to those stories. We have just the way the industry's gone. We have a Miami Beach reporter, we have a City of Miami reporter, and we have one other reporter who's kind of tasked with jumping around and hitting. We have a Metro-Dade reporter, obviously, but or Miami-Dade reporter, county government, but someone else tasked with jumping around and hitting all these the Pinecrest, the Coral Gables, Doral, so.
That's what I was kind of touching on at the opening there, is that, despite our best efforts, there's no shortage of stories to tell, but there is a shortage of people to tell it.
Right, exactly.
Linda, problems facing journalists today, obstacles you've had to overcome.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Jessica and David said. I go all the way back to 1972. That's when I moved to Miami. And West Kendall was strawberry fields. I remember picking strawberries in West Kendall. There was nothing there. We also did not have the Miami Heat. We did not have the Miami Marlins. We did not have the Panthers. The University of my football team was still in its dormant stages. The population had not yet, grown to be as diverse as it is today. When I started at the Herald in 1983, we had 400 plus on the news staff. We had Tropic magazine, we had neighbors sections, we had foreign bureaus, we had national bureaus. We had somebody in New York, LA, Atlanta, and we had tentacles reaching all throughout South Florida. We had a huge Broward bureau, huge Palm Beach bureau. And then we had these local bureaus called Neighbors, which twice a week we put out quite a solid, magazine covering these sections of the county. So just think how now we're down to, 25% of that staff, and we're trying to cover an even larger area, a population that has become even more complicated, and a place that has, not really well adapted to the pressures of all this growth. So time, and we're expected to sort of be, we've lost a lot of our expertise because we're spread so thin. So before, we would have people covering these specific beats, and now a lot of those beats have disappeared, and you're just sort of thrown into things, and sort of your sourcing and your expertise doesn't have the depth that it should. So you're constantly playing catch up. And then the 24/7 news cycle, which has changed just dramatically since I started. You're no longer competing for a scoop the next morning, you're competing for a scoop in the next 30 minutes. And so a lot of things that we would love to cover that need to be covered just kind of fall through the cracks.
Did you say you estimate 25% down from 400?
Yeah, I think now our newsroom is about 100.
Wow.
And that includes El Nuevo Herald as well.
I think the common line I'm seeing between all your answers is that it's not always a lack of interest. Sometimes it's just an impossibility. We can't cover everything. And I know personally that's something that sometimes keeps me up at night. A story that I couldn't get done that day, and I hope that I can get it done the next day. Without further delay, I would love to get into our next part here, which is to share with our viewers right now what can they do to pitch a story to you that might catch your attention, that might help you actually accomplish that story. If we could start with Jessica, what makes a good story pitch? What do you look for when somebody sends you a tip?
Well, a well-informed tip, someone who doesn't distance themselves. It's very important if you're going to pitch a story to us, or, shoot us a tip. Don't just say, hey, you should go look at this, and then, leave me out of it and walk away. Tell me what you know, connect me with others that are impacted by this. One of the factors that we always have to consider is, how many people does this impact, whether this is newsworthy. And if it's impacting you, chances are you know others that it's impacting, and you can help connect us to those people. Give us whatever details you know. There's always this hesitation for folks like, I don't want to be involved, you know, I don't, you didn't hear this from me, and that's fine, but give us what you know. Don't point us in a direction completely blinded. Let us know what we're looking for, and that helps immensely. And like I said, if you know others that are impacted, your family, your friends, your neighbors, you know, depending on what the situation is, put us in touch with those. Good example, Giuseppe and I did a story, or a series of stories last December, on a kindergartner teacher that CPS work determined had been abusing her students. She was allowed to transfer schools and a year later retired. So when Giuseppe came across this, we started digging deep, obviously. And, you know, I also tracked down the aide who worked in her classroom, and we took a deep dive. A follow-up story that was very important part of that series was the parents' perspectives. When one mother stepped up and reached out to us, and then she helped put me in touch with other mothers. And that was a missing piece of the story, because there was this whole group of mothers that were, you know, chatting in a group text together, like, oh my God, did you see this story? And were able to tell us how their children to this day are still feeling the impacts of the abuse of this woman. And that just made the story that much more rich and impactful and important, because this teacher had a long effect on these little kids.
As much work as we did on that story, I can't 100% say it would have come to fruition if we hadn't have had the help and the buy-in from the people who approached us and who were directly affected by what was going on. I'll throw it to David. Any tips for people that want to reach out to you and pitch a story idea?
Sort of like what Jessica suggested, make as much of the pie as you can. Make as much of the meal as you can, because look, we're, especially in my role, breaking news real time, I've got a lot of options. And I've got limited time, and tell if you can save me time, that there are times I look at a story and go, that's a great story. There's no way I have time for this, and I just don't. And it's not that you're some small person. I mean, I sat down with interviews with Homeland Security about child porn one time, like hours of interviews, and then I just never had the time to turn that into a story. So make as much of the pie as you can for us, and then we can run with it. Also, don't be afraid to come back if we've said, hey, that's a good idea. Okay, I'd like to get back to you. If we don't get back to you, don't be afraid to come back to us and say, hey, are you still interested in this? And because again, we've got sort of work ADD going on sometimes, and that Google thing that the Google Mail now does, where it pops up, hey, you sent this email 5 days ago, or you got this email 5 days ago. I've become very, very thankful for that. I'm like, oh, yeah. You get back to that person. And so, don't be afraid to come back to us. And, also don't be afraid to, don't be afraid if you're a reader to reach out to us, to establish communicate with us, whether it be social media. Twitter's obviously a place we all are, or in an email. Whether you like a story, you have some constructive criticism and put nicely, not you complete idiot. The same thing can be said, and we'll take it. It's like anything else with anybody. There's a way to say things to people that perfectly fine. But anyway, it establishes a relationship, and over time, and we'd be, if we see something from you and you say, hey, I think this would be interesting for you, we're probably going to be more likely to say, yeah, this person seems like a sensible, smart person, good reader. Maybe this is something I hadn't thought of before. And that's another thing. the angle that I hadn't thought of before. That's always, you know, you show me, if you give something to me with an angle that I'm like, whoa, yeah, wow, okay, that seems interesting. That, but it should be a unique angle. Just because you thought of it just now doesn't mean it's, you know, necessarily unique. But if it is, much more likely up on it.
I ditto everything you just said. I just like you said, to put it bluntly, if you can make our jobs easier, there is a greater likelihood that that story will become a reality. If you have documents related to the story, if you know someone we might be able to interview, that goes miles and miles. I love that you mentioned constructive criticism. That we can only get better with feedback. So as long as it's, you know, respectful and it's true feedback, we always welcome that.
And when you said, you know, give me the documents, one of the things that, yeah, this is obviously professional PR firms that some of these law firms have working for them. But I've had people say, hey, you know, there's this lawsuit that's going, you know, that's just happened. You might have interest in. Well, maybe I do, but you know, there's several other lawsuits, and the one that has that, by the way, here is the actual suit. You don't have to go into the court records and do, you know, even saving me that little bit of time, that helps.
Linda, something you look for in a story tip, maybe something that catches your attention, something that may help that story become a reality.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm looking for stuff that's interesting, stuff that's compelling. Conflict helps. Okay, we're not looking to do sort of bland, benign stories. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time or the room. We want to do stuff that has an impact, and we want to do stuff that everybody else has said is illustrative, perhaps, of larger trends, problems. So we can take like a microcosm, and it's got you know, people can relate to it. So once again, the larger the network of impact that it could have, the better the story. And we are, you know, we are sort of obsessive with our curiosity. We are incorrigible busybodies. Okay, we want juicy stuff. We want yarns. I want interesting characters, and I can make just about anything interesting if you just give me a crumb. And of course, it really helps if you give me some phone numbers, give me some names, be a little bit of a detective yourself, and get me some background information that I can confirm. And you don't your name doesn't have to be used. We'll talk about that in a minute, but just trust us. We are interested in what you're interested in, and if we can find a way to make it, to tease it out and make it applicable to more of our audience, then, you know, we can make it work. I'm thinking of an example. I got a tip about a cozy little house in Coral Gables, where a man lived with his elderly mom, and this was their dream house. They had bought it after they lost everything when they left Cuba, and they came to Miami, and they saved up their money, and they bought this nice little house in Coral Gables on a nice little street. And then Coral Gables decided to let a developer build a mega, and that's a new word here, a mega development of condos, offices, hotel, retail. And the developer bought out every single homeowner on that street, except Mr. Capote and his mother. They would not sell. They wanted to stay in their dream house with their mango tree and their avocado tree. And so it became a marvelous story about the little house surrounded by cranes and fencing and piles of rock. And we went over there, and there's a cement mixer driving by their kitchen window, and there's a backhoe driving by their patio, and there's a row of porta potties on their, you know, on their side yard. But they would not move. They would not take the money from the developer, and they offered him a lot of money. And they pressured them, and they said, no, this is home. This is memories. And so that became not just a story about the little house and the man and his mom, but just how overdevelopment and too many variances for two buildings that are too tall and developments that are too big, that's happening everywhere in South Florida. And I was able to sort of describe other areas of town where the same thing is happening, and you're losing these, cozy residential neighborhoods. And what's that going to do to the traffic and parking and taxes and what have you. So that's an example of like a small story that had, created big waves. And that's, that, and it was a nice character study as well. This is a really interesting family, and their story was interesting. And they were sort of the, it was sort of an underdog story. And that's what we're looking for. I mean, just stuff that's interesting to read. So give yourself the same test that we would give it. Would I want to read this? As Edna Buchanan used to say, she was our Pulitzer Prize winning crime writer at the Miami Herald for years. Did you choke on your coffee when you read the lead of that story? So just be a reader as well as a tipster when you're thinking about your ideas.
That story you mentioned hits on multiple points of newsworthiness. It has conflict, it has human interest, and though you were citing one specific example, it had widespread impact, the general topic. And actually, we were going to get into questions anyway, and it's perfect timing because we just got one that is a great question, and it's perfect for the question that the topic that we just touched on. So this is for anybody that wants to take it up. Can you explain for readers the difference between a topic and an angle? The difference between a topic and an angle. Something comes to mind, unless anybody wants to take it up. The thing that came to mind for me immediately was a conversation that I recently had with David, because it's hurricane season. And I think that would be a good example of the difference between a topic and an angle. The topic would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the topic would be hurricane season, but we're probably not going to be interested in the annual hurricane tips. It's the same every single year. We're well aware. That would be hurricane season is the topic. What is the angle? The usual yearly tips is not going to work as the angle. Do you have any more thoughts on that, Dave? What would be a good angle?
I don't know. I was thinking the topic is the subject. The angle is like the way you look at the subject. And with something like hurricane season, right? Don't give us, hey, you want to talk to this person about hurricane prep? Like, no, dude, I lived through Andrew. Okay, this is what we do. We've lost our houses. We've covered hurricanes. This is what we do. But I don't know. Yes, somebody mentioned, how to survive it in your car. I don't know, just something different. Some different strategy for handling your pets. That's always people really stress over the pet, as they should. In if you have a big hurricane coming toward you. Different. If you don't have a generator, I don't know, different ways to deal with really deal with being powerless, or if you give me something different, if you show me something different, or you have somebody or you yourself have a different way of dealing with this common thing that we've dealt with so many times, that's interesting, and that's likely to perk it up. The angle is the approach to the topic, and that's what's got to be different, because in general, we have a lot of our stories fall into the same topics. They're just, obviously the different angles.
I would also say it's kind of what we in the news business call, the hook of the story. There's different, and like you said, approach is the perfect word, different approaches to a story. One that comes to mind, a story I did a few months ago on a victim of COVID. this woman, there was an interesting angle in her telling her story of her death, other than just, she died tragically. Her family didn't even get to say goodbye to her, or said goodbye to her on Zoom. But that initially her death was not ruled as because of COVID, and that there was an error, and the doctor, she was in a nursing home, and the doctor had signed off as she had died of natural causes, and it got flagged by the Florida Department of Health, who sent it over to medical examiner. It's like, hey, this doesn't look right. She died of pneumonia. It's living in a nursing home. We got COVID going on. Go check it out. He goes and tests her at the funeral home, and sure enough, she had the coronavirus. And so, they took a deeper dive into her records, and it turns out she had died from COVID. So, my story of telling of her death had that different angle, how this woman's death was almost not counted as a COVID death when she did in fact die from coronavirus.
I was going to add, when you're talking about angles, remember, we have editors who are saying, well, what's the angle? Why should we write this? Okay. We don't have carte blanche to put whatever we want in the paper and write about whatever we want. So that's one thing. Another thing is angle. Think local. Like, what is the local angle? What makes this special to where we live? Okay. So, for example, okay, I'm trying to localize the coronavirus. Okay. It's been with us for months, going to be with us for months. How do we keep it fresh? How do we keep coming up with new angles that are useful and applicable for people? So there's a study out about how, and I'm working on a story about this, how people who speak loudly spread the virus. Like, the risk of transmission is 80% higher for loud talkers. Okay? And if you spoke quietly, it's almost the same effect as having a mask. Okay? That's how effective it is if you speak in quiet tones. What do we do here in Miami? Do we speak quietly? So I'm taking that story and I'm going to localize it. It's going to be useful, hopefully, because maybe people will learn something from it. But I hope it will also be sort of reflective of our culture here, and maybe hopefully people will have a sense of humor as well. But that's taking, coronavirus. We're all sick of coronavirus stories, but this is finding a different angle on it and localizing it as well.
Thank you for all those examples. And we have another question that aligns with this topic. I mean, how could the pandemic not come up? Because the pandemic has forced reporters to work from home, as you can see in all of our backgrounds, what is the best way to communicate? If we don't have your cell number, which is probably often the case, if we don't have your cell number to follow up on a story, should we message you on social media? Although I will say I give my cell phone number out like candy these days, but say they don't have your cell phone number, what should they do? Should they message you on social media? Is there some other way that you would prefer?
There's so many ways to reach us. I can say here at the Bradenton Herald, if you leave me a voicemail, and same with any of us, Giuseppe included, if you leave us a voicemail in our office line, those are automatically emailed to us. So I am getting an MP3 with your voicemail right away, and it has your phone number on the MP3 file, and I'm able to call you back, as soon as I can or when time allows. Email, always a great option. Direct message on Twitter. I've had people who don't follow me or I don't follow them. It's like, hey, can you follow me back? And, engage in Twitter conversation, Facebook message. There's so many ways. We're unfortunately way too connected sometimes. So we're reachable, I promise you. Working remote is nothing new for us. While we may be doing more of it, more writing from home than ever before, as journalists, we're used to, I've written in my car, at crime scenes, on the side of the curb, and so many unique places, at meetings. We're used to working remote. This is not a new. So, Google us if you have to. At the bottom of our on our stories, our email address, our Twitter handle, we're easily accessible. And we want to hear from you.
I always thought email or the phone number, people, when we lost the offices, that, people, kind of assume that the phone numbers went away. They didn't. And like Jessica said, they go immediately into our, our little email thing. They go to our phone too. So doesn't matter if we're near a laptop. As Linda and I were sports writers forever, we didn't see the office for months at a time back in those days. So, working remotely is nothing new. I would say for me, email and calling the work line, because that's just as connected as I am. Social media, my Instagram, you can DM my Instagram. You can as try to DM my Twitter, or just say, hey, give me a way to reach out to me on Twitter. Say, hey, give me a way to contact you. So, but yeah, we are all quite connected.
I'm a dinosaur. Just call me 305-987-3582. Leave me a message. Email me, and I have email guilt because I get a ton of emails and I don't respond as quickly or as thoroughly as I should. That really bothers me, but it's true. So be persistent. If I don't get back to you on the first email, I will not be offended if you nag me. And then Twitter is okay too. You can send me a direct message on Twitter, but we are glad to hear from you, and we try to respond to everybody, but we can't always do that.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Do not be afraid to follow up and give us a gentle reminder. I mean, there's probably a fine line between a gentle reminder and harassment. Maybe don't reach out every single day, but once at the beginning of the week, midweek, at the end of the week, do not be afraid to follow up, because there's many times when I just get overwhelmed, I forget, somebody reminds me, and it results in a story. Sometimes that's all we need.
I'd also like to add, don't hesitate if you, for instance, are in touch with one of us, but the story is not applicable. Like, you're not in touch with Giuseppe, but you have an education related story, but you're connected with me. Don't hesitate. Say, hey, I have this story, just don't go into all the nuts and bolts of it, but hey, I have this story about this situation happening at this school. I'd love to pitch it to the right person. Who should I reach out to? I'm happy to connect you. More than happy. And it doesn't even have to be at the same paper. I mean, obviously do your homework and find out who is the reporter who covers that subject, whatever your hometown paper is, but we're also all very well connected and chatting sometimes in way too many chats at one time. So we're happy to help when we can, despite how busy we are, to put you in touch with the right person.
We'll have another opportunity for questions later, but I have one more for now. I love this one based on the comments that we often get on social media. I'd say it's a bit of a controversial subject. But do you find that newspapers and publication paywalls have helped or hurt journalists in their job as reporters? It becomes harder for people to stay well informed when the real news is hidden. So do you find that it sways the kind of information that you get from sources? Who wants to take that one up? The paywall.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, let's start off with the fact, years ago, before there was an internet, the news was never free. You had to buy the paper. That said, today in 2020, how many subscriptions do we all have? What, you subscribe to Netflix, Hulu, Prime, whatever, where you stream your music from, all kinds of things. I mean, I even have a subscription to a car wash where I can go, once a day, every day in a month. Subscriptions are just a way of life in 2020. So it shouldn't be any different necessarily for news. And if you want good quality journalism, then you have to support it. And I assure you, we want to produce as much as we can and as in-depth coverage as we can, but we need the resources.
Yeah, rent must be paid.
Food must be eaten.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Lots of it.
And I got to support the kid, so I don't think the news, I don't think it's affected. Paywall's been up for a few years. I haven't exactly noticed a reduction in people reaching out to me or to us to do stories. Um, the only reason that, the only difference is on our end is being able to say, yeah, that might be a really good story, but that's in that requires investigation in West Palm Beach. We're not doing that. We maybe we could have done it 30 years ago. We can't do it. We're not doing it now. That's the only difference. But I don't think the paywall has affected, how people can get to me, or how people can get to us to suggest stories. And there are more stories than ever being produced by our newsrooms, despite the fact that there are fewer of us than ever. There's more content, stories, briefs, however you want to call it. There are more words and more stuff being cranked out by us than ever. I don't think the room's being hidden from anybody. And frankly, if it's, the money you have to pay per month that's hiding the news from you, sorry, they have to pay us out of something,
It's still a bargain. It's still, I mean, you get entertainment, recipes, news you can use, opinion. I mean, we have just so much in a newspaper. It's just, unlimited amount of information and entertainment and insights, and it's worth it. And, one problem is we do have fewer subscribers today than we did. The newspaper business has not figured out a business model that works. Let's be honest. We're in trouble, okay? But we still have millions and millions of people reading our content. And we need people to pay for it. But I don't think that the paywall situation or the decline in subscribers has affected our accessibility or people's accessibility to us.
This next question piggybacks off the conversation we just had on what do you look for in a story tip. I'd like to talk about the best ways for people to reach out to you. I know we've touched on that a little bit, but how can you get in touch with your local reporters? I know that most of our viewers are probably in Florida, but these tips can apply to anybody, anywhere. How to get in touch with your local reporter and how to begin developing a relationship with your local news outlet. Jessica, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, really begins with being knowledgeable and reading and supporting whatever that local newspaper is. Look, the reality is a local newspaper tells those local stories better than any national outlet ever will, better than the TV stations can, because they have limited amount of time in a small segment to present you with the story. We have the luxury of especially online, to tell you more in-depth stories and really get to the heart of some matters. Read our stories, read our paper on a regular basis. If you're reading the paper on a regular basis, whether it's online, e-edition, or in print, you're going to know who's telling which stories, and you should know who to look for. And if you're reading my story online, you're seeing my Twitter handle, my email, it's the links are right there, and that's a 123 where you can reach me. Follow us on social media, engage with us on social media. Some of our most loyal followers or subscribers regularly engage, whether it's a retweet or a comment. And if you don't have to always agree, we can agree to disagree, and let's engage, let's talk about it. We can talk about it on social media and have a conversation, because we are part of your community too. We live here and we're your neighbors, These stories matter to us just as much as they matter to you.
David?
Pretty much what Jessica said. I mean, we just reach out to us, and communicate with us, because we are also living through whatever, and we're living through some of the same frustrations you are with our local community. We're living with you know, we're in this pandemic too, you know, when it comes to the pandemic, but we're also, we're also running into the same traffic problems we have when we did a story, kind of a microcosm of current newsrooms. There was a water main got hit in Hialeah, you know, huge mess, blocked off a major intersection. That day we start hearing that, you know, maybe they didn't have the permits. It was all shady, exactly who the contractor was working for. And we weren't able to, because we don't have a Hialeah reporter, the two people covering it on breaking news, myself and another woman named Jimena Tavel, we had to do other things the next day. But I ran into that situation, this traffic thing. I'm like, wait, why is traffic? It was an intersection that I passed by as I go from the office to picking up my daughter at school. And one day I was like, what's the deal here? And I was like, oh, you know, and, you know, so we're right in there with you. And I'm sitting there in traffic just as frustrated as somebody else. And you know what? If there was a Hialeah citizen out there who knew something and who had any idea of what went wrong there or what the deal was there, I would have loved it if they would have called us after that first story, even though we weren't able to get back to it and didn't have a Hialeah report. We want to know these things, and we also, for some stories, especially the stories that really affect you locally, like, you know, traffic's a big one, especially down here. We want to follow up. We want to keep going with the story and kind of, you know, complete the circle if we can until its end. And so.
Well, like you mentioned, I love that you mentioned that, you know, it's crazy that we have to state this, but we are humans too. We live in your communities. So when you reach out to us, I'd ask that you be patient. I know we've all had people reach out to us at one point or another, saying, how dare you not include this in your story or things like that. Sometimes most of the time it's because we didn't know. So just please exercise patience. If you have information, maybe you see missing from an article, it's likely we had no idea that it existed. So please bring it to our attention. Linda, could you share your thoughts on how to get in touch with reporters and develop a relationship with their local news outlets?
Well, same thing we were saying earlier, just don't be afraid to call, write. Hey, I got some really informative letters when I was covering the trial of the Outlaws motorcycle gang. Those guys were writing me from prison. I also got some nice mail from Nevin Shapiro. Remember the University of Miami football corruptor? He gave me some good tips in his letters from jail. So anyone can develop a relationship with a reporter, and we like it because usually that person becomes someone that we depend on to keep us updated. We all have our blind spots and we live in our own little corners of the world. And if, you know, somebody in Cutler Ridge can let me know about something down there, and I know that this is this is a reliable source, and I know it's going to be a good story, and I know he's going to, you know, help me, lead me to other people, then that's a win-win relationship. So like we said before, just reach out to us and don't be offended if we don't write every story that you suggest. I mean, that's not going to happen. And don't be offended if every person that we talk to isn't quoted in the story, because that's not going to happen either. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to be beneficial for you and me if we can collaborate and come up with a good story idea that has an impact.
We have a question from a viewer. I'm going to try to phrase this delicately. For our PR professionals out there, what are some don'ts when a PR professional reaches out to you? What would you say is a don't?
Have a major don't to me is having no idea, where you are emailing, or because it's usually email. The reach out's usually email. Having no idea where you are emailing. A perfect example is, to me, was someone who reached out to me, about, I forget what this person was an expert in. They wanted, can we meet and have coffee? We're going to be in your area. Okay, yeah, sure, fine. And then they said, he's going to be in Tampa and I'm like, okay, I'll forgive you for not knowing Florida geography if you're not from Florida. Most people think like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are near each other. They're not. There's like 6 major cities that are closer to Pittsburgh than Philadelphia. But at least if you're emailing me, at least do the homework to go, yeah, let's see if I'm going to suggest that this guy meet us, let's see how close he really is. Is he an hour? Is he 20 minutes away? Is he an hour away? Is he 4 hours away, by car? That things like that. Get the basics. Get the basics. Like the same way you would expect us on a story, if there's a basic mistake in a story, that can't be excused as just being a brain fart. If there's a basic mistake in a story, you go, this person doesn't know what the hell they're writing about, and you toss it out. Well, it's kind of the same thing with us. If you make a basic mistake when emailing us, like you say, geography, asking, I don't know if you've ever written about this, and a simple Google search will show we've written about it 17 times. That's like, that puts you on. If that doesn't knock you out, it'll definitely put you on the bottom of the pile.
Know the basics. Yeah, know the region that you're reaching out to. Try and direct your pitch to the correct beat. If you're pitching me a business story and I'm the education reporter, that's probably not going to help. Although if it has a local angle to it, I may pass it on to the correct reporter. And that's another thing. It needs to have a local angle. I've gotten pitches from not only other states, but other countries. So did anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both of you said. Keep it relevant. Not only, doing very basic few minutes, 5 minutes of your homework, and knowing what our coverage area is and knowing what I cover if you're going to send me something, but also keep it timely. We've received press releases for, what could be important events. And obviously you didn't plan this event 5 hours ago. So why are you telling me only 5 hours before it happens? We also have schedules and are juggling multiple things. And in order to make these very difficult decisions of which stories we're going to tell, like, give us some time to know ahead of time, so we're not scrambling at last minute or there's no one available to cover your event.
Before we get off this topic, I just wanted to touch on something really quickly, and that is anonymous sources, anonymous tips. Feel free to reach out to us with an idea, even if you don't want to be named in the article. Sometimes you can provide me enough background information without ever being publicly involved to where I can verify that information. I can start looking into it. If you don't reach out, I may never have any idea that there was an issue or something that I should be looking into. And our careers are built on trust. You can trust that if you come forward and you want us to respect confidentiality and you want to remain anonymous, that will be respected. I give the extreme example all the time that if there was a worst case scenario and I ended up in court and they tried to compel me to name an anonymous source, I'm going to jail. There's no scenario in which I would disrespect someone's request for anonymity. So please, I hope you feel comfortable reaching out to us with information, even if you don't want to be publicly involved.
I think that information is so important because it's important for us to understand what we're writing about. And oftentimes, I think we all do this. We are going to talk to far more people than are quoted in our stories, because we need to understand how this is impacting other people, what's really going on, and have a thorough understanding of the situation to be able to tell the story. So help me understand what's happening. And that in itself is invaluable. You can provide documents. If you're dealing with something, corruption, abuse of power, those in power are not going to be inclined to hand over those damning records. So hand them over if you have them. You know, no one has to know where a record comes from. It exists out there. Many people have a copy of it.
Yeah, we're very good at, I think all of us are going to go to our grave with conversations that never happened. And, you know, we're very good at providing plausible deniability, like, you know. So
We're very loyal to you. Like, we don't want, you know, we don't want you to get in trouble, and that would really backfire on us too. I mean, we've burned somebody forever, right? So I know it's hard to say, trust me, I'm a reporter, okay? But that's kind of what you have to do. And remember, there are levels of information. In other words, we don't necessarily have to use your name, but perhaps we can use some other identifying feature of you, because there's pressure on us not to be creating fake news, right? We are the purveyors of fake news. We are the enemy of the people. So we have to prove that the person that we're getting information from and the person that we're writing about is a real person. And this is not a figment of our imagination. Okay, so that's why we need your name, your last name, your age, where you live, what you do for a living. But if the information that you're giving us, you want it to be confidential, certainly there are ways that we can make use of that information without using your name at all. And we can protect you. There's many, you know, there's off the record, there's background only. I mean, there's, and we can sort of negotiate with you what works for you and what works for us in order to make the story credible, but at the same time, you know, protect you as a source.
I also like to add that sometimes that enables us to go find, you know, confirm this elsewhere. And I mean, we're going to go confirm information regardless from multiple sources. So if you don't want to be named, that's fine. But that adds credibility to the story, that, you know, if I have, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 people, you know, who are on the record, and then I'm adding more sources that don't want to be named, you know, that's confirming what I'm looking at is true, not just to my editor that I need to prove this to, you know, but publishing it, and for my readers, from all of you guys out there, so you know that this is, you know, information we've confirmed from multiple sources. And okay, you don't want to be named, fine, give me the information, and it makes it that much easier for me to go find it from someone else.
That's a great point. You may see 1 or 2 names in the article, but we talked to 10, 15, 20 people on the background, people that wanted to help us have a better understanding of the story. We're getting close to our time here. I want to close it out with one more question. I'm curious to learn from each of you if there's a story or a topic that, because of all the factors, you know, that we've discussed, that you were unable to cover up to this point. And I'm curious how that's weighed on you. What have you not been able to cover, and how has that affected you?
I mean, Giuseppe and I talk about this all the time. There's the laundry list of, you know, just like we all have to be read books, piles of books we either own or want to buy that we want to read and don't seem to get around to it. There's the laundry list of stories we want to write. And since the pandemic hit, that list seems to be getting longer, and it does weigh on us, and the insomnia is a real thing, and you start thinking about it, and you're making notes to yourself, emailing yourself, you know, making these long to-do lists for the next day that just sometimes seem unreasonable. More specifically, you know, there were in-depth stories or projects I was working on when the pandemic hit that I had to set aside, and, you know, anxious to get back to them, and sources have reached out to me and like, what happened, or like, what's going on. It's like, I haven't forgotten about you, I'm gonna get back to that story. And at the same time, there's new story ideas, like new angles with the pandemic that I have not had the opportunity to look at yet that I would love to. Like child abuse has always been a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I feel passionate about telling those stories. And I mean, we know it, you know, the stats are out there, child abuse, domestic violence on the rise. It makes logical sense with so many people stuck at home and not necessarily the best circumstances. I'd like to take a look at that at a local level. I haven't had that opportunity.
I would say there's two levels of stories with me. There's the longer looks at certain things in my, you know, breaking news, real time, you know, whatever you want to call it. You know, I'm a person who feeds the beast. You know, theoretically, you know, gives others time to do longer term stuff or longer form stuff. However, there were some things that I wanted to do that, you know, just didn't fit. One of the things was I had done a lot of stories on guys being convicted of child porn possession, child porn distribution. There was somebody who worked at my daughter's school who got, you know, convicted of it. And I was kind of like, I kept seeing certain elements continually in these stories. And I sat down, talked with some Homeland Security investigators who worked with that and really wanted to run with that a lot more. That was a few years ago. And haven't been able to really, you know, kind of get back to it because we're feeding the beast. And even in feeding the beast, there are stories, there are things I want to have as regular elements because look, it's, you know, yeah, I'm thinking also in a business sense. Subscribers like to see regular elements. That's a simple fact. And one of the things I wanted to do is, you know, every month there's certain professional discipline that's handed down by either the Florida Bar or for lawyers, medical professionals from nursing assistants to medical doctors. And, you know, I would love to be able to do every single one of those things because to me, some of those stories are warnings. Like, look, you might want to check this person out before you go to them. And in fact, very recently, I did a story this past week on a doctor who was accused of molesting a patient. And we did a story after one had come out, and after our story came out, like 3 or 4 more women came forward, and then he gets arrested, and then like another 5 or 6 come forward, and then but it all started because it started with this one woman reporting him, us reporting on that, and so every time there's one of those stories that's there and I can't get to it, that might, you know, be a warning sign for, hey, you might want to stay away from this person, or might not want to have this person taking care of your elderly, you know, or disabled relative. Yeah, that weighs up. That weighs because I'm like, that's a missed opportunity to, you know, do our job.
The things that keep us up at night. Linda?
Yeah, I mean, I can go back 20, 30 years and tell you specifically some stories that still haunt me that weren't written for one reason or another. Some were reported and not written. Some didn't get past the editor. Some I just, you know, didn't have time to do. You know, you lift a crease here and there and you're like, wow, this has to be done. This would be such a great story. And then, you know, you go off on another path and you never get back to it. And it really, I mean, it eats away at us. You know, people say never look back, but I think we are people, you know, and we care about people. We want to write about people. And through the years, some of those people just get lost. And it's, you know, it's kind of the disappointing part of this career in journalism. But I would say one thing that I wish I could write more about, I wish that the media would write more about. And I think maybe this is because of my personal history, and as a sports writer, I tend to gravitate toward troubled athletes rather than the superhero image is mental illness and the mentally ill and the way that this country doesn't treat mental illness and all the cascade of societal problems stemming from mental illness and the taboos around it. And we still haven't figured it out. And so that's something I wish we had a beat, devoted to that, because I think it's just has so many dimensions in our society. And so that's one thing that if I could change my job, I would love to delve into that.
I think all of us also, each of us, every time we, if we're in an area that our outlet has not covered well, even if we're just stopping at gas there, or if we're going to a restaurant there, going to a jazz thing there, it doesn't leave us that, we're not, there are stories to be told here and we ain't telling them. And it's a factor of, of what's happened with our business. It's a factor of, there's a lot of different factors of why. Some of them are preventable, some of them frankly preventable, others not as much. But I know every time every time you're there, we're there. I live in an area that I feel like, as I walk to, when I walk to get my colada in the mornings, back when I used to do that instead of make my own, I look around and feel like, feels like we're not serving this area. How can we be relevant in this area? What is going on here? What do these people want to know that we can tell them? And that what do they need to know that we can tell them? And it's both like I say, with me, it's both a business thing, it's the journalism business, but it's also a human thing. Like Linda said, for people, it's like, you do feel that angst and that, that frustration. And, there are times it wears on you. You get very frustrated, and sometimes it comes out in dealing with our colleagues.
I couldn't agree with you more. It can be exhausting. It can be frustrating, but that's the whole point of this discussion. Why didn't you cover that? We're hoping this isn't the only one. We're hoping to build bridges. We're hoping to talk with our readers, our community members far more frequently. And I hope that's what results from this discussion. We're out of time now, I'm sorry to say, but do we have some contact info that we can put on the screen? Here we are. If you have a question that did not get answered, you can reach out to spjflorida@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to get back to everybody or put you in touch with the correct person. Thank you again to SPJ Florida and the News Guild for making this possible. I just hope that our viewers can walk away today with a little bit of a better understanding about what we face on a daily basis, and more importantly, with some actionable tips to get in touch with their local news outlets and to get to know their local reporters and hopefully get some stories told. Thank you, three, for being here, and thank you to everyone who stuck with us over the last hour.
Thank you to you, Giuseppe.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for arranging. Thanks for having us.
It was truly a pleasure. Like I said, we don't get these opportunities often, so it was really something special. I appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone that tuned in.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. You guys are our eyes and ears, and we really sincerely care about you, or we would definitely not do this for a living. So please reach out.
Thank you, everybody.